Hi everyone, this is Elias Martin of CollectingJapanesePrints.com. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where on Wednesdays we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. I've had some technical difficulties. This is the fourth time I'm trying to do this video, and the first attempt was nearly completed. So my apologies for those of you who are on live with me. We had kind of we had an interesting conversation, but I'm hoping to be able to replicate that and do even a better one. So today's Woodblock Wednesday is dedicated to a topic that I just love discussing: Shin Hanga versus Sosaku Hanga prints. And today I have two very different print artists that represent each genre quite well, and each of their prints actually are focused on the same subject, or basically the same subject. And I thought this was a wonderful opportunity to look at two prints from each genre and see how different they are, though they share the same subject. So without further ado, let's go to the table and have a look. So I'm going to back up and you could see what I have here today. And this print may be familiar to you because I've done a Woodblock Wednesday previously, about a month ago, on this print, a few others by Goyo, Hashiguchi Goyo. And I'm going to use this print in today's conversation with this Woodblock print by Koshiro Onchi. And so today, we're going to focus not necessarily on the things that we discussed previously with this Goyo, but on a conversation about both of these artists within the genres they're working in and how different they approach printmaking. So I'll focus on this print first. This work, as I said, is by Onchi. He's one of my favorite Japanese print artists. This design is known by the print Obi. It was done in 1930. And this is about roughly 15 years after Onchi produced the first work of abstraction in Japan. He did that in 1915. And Onchi's early work was primarily focused on abstraction and avant-garde compositions. However, he was a very strong advocate for woodblock printmaking, and so he wanted to advance the acceptance of woodblock printmaking within Japanese culture as a fine art. And since the Japanese themselves didn't understand abstraction so well, he sort of pushed that to the side for a good amount of time and focused on representational subjects. Though he did that, his prints nonetheless contain really wonderful elements of modernity and expressionism and all of the isms, basically, that were coming into Japan in the early 1900s when Onchi was a student. And in this print, we have a woman dressed in a very fashionable kimono from the 1930s. And this is, again, this print is done 1930. And the design features a woman in a sort of walking across the plane towards the viewer, where you could see her obi, or the sash that goes around her kimono, serving as a belt. And in this composition, it's interesting because Onchi focuses primarily on the figure, but he angles her in a way where the subject is seen almost walking towards the viewer, and her head is cropped. We don't really see the top portion of her head, and her face is angled downward, and so the entire composition is sort of geared towards her movement towards the viewer. And it's just fascinating that Onchi would sort of create this the composition is asymmetrical, and he does that and then crops most of her head. You don't see her arms or her hands here. She's facing towards the viewer, but this portion of her arm is not shown. And that is all so that the viewer experiences the subject as a figure that is active, very active. This composition, if I should say, one of the main sort of thesis is that Onchi wants to advance is this sense of movement and this dynamism and this active subject, and everything within the composition aids to that. And so, not just that the composition is interesting and really forward-looking, but the printing itself. If we look at the composition, you could see there's a very active and spontaneous print quality, or printing to the print. You could see, well, first of all, you could see sort of the splatter of the pigment that has migrated from the composition into the margins here. And that's a telltale sign of a self-printed work by Onchi. You could see the pigment here has spilled into the kimono, and the entire composition is printed with a sort of soft and wet technique that Onchi is so well known for. And all of those aspects of the printing work in service to the composition to animate it. And this figure becomes more a portrait of a person, a particular person, in fact, with a life that's moving and active, and in some ways, a really good representation of a moga. Now, of course, we can't see her hair so well because of the way the design is cropped, but her hair is shown sort of in almost in a bob style fashion. And so women of this period either cut their hair very short, which was quite controversial, or they fashioned their hair in such a way to mimic a bob haircut. And so she does have a very stylish late 20s, early 30s hairstyle, which is very fashionable, but it's also very indicative of a newly liberated young woman of the town that is within Tokyo, not a town, but a big city. And she's busy with her social life, attending gatherings, going to cafes, jazz clubs. So this figure, it represents a very actively social woman from this time. And I think all of that, the design, the printing speaks to this. Now, in a very different way, well, before I move on to the Goyo, I should say, for those of you who are not familiar with Sosaku Hanga, Onchi was a big advocate for Sosaku Hanga, meaning that he and his fellow artists within his circle advocated for an artist to produce their own wood blocks, produce meaning they carved the design, and they printed the prints themselves. So they were part of the entire process of woodblock printmaking, from the conception to the actual production of each impression. Now, a stark contrast to that tradition is the Shin Hanga tradition, which Goyo was certainly a part of. And Goyo, though he established his own studio and had complete control of his designs, he did not carve his blocks and he did not print his prints. He hired artisans to do that. And so what we have here is a beautifully expressed composition done with such high precision that it's flawless. You could see every aspect of this print, and it's done perfectly. And so that is not just something that Goyo was striving for. Certainly, that was his goal. But within the Shin Hanga movement, that was also a goal, to reproduce prints with a high quality or high standard of reproduction, where the registration is perfect, and they just show a well trained artisan group of artisans making the prints. And so the design is elegant, but the craftsmanship holds up to the elegance of the composition. And so this design, although elegant in its own right, is all about expression. And it's about the expression of the artist's own temperament at the time of printmaking. And so for Onchi, he may have produced 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 impressions of this design, but they're all printed quite differently. And in particular, he was a big fan of imbuing his prints with his own emotional sort of state of being at the time he was making the prints. And so what we have here really, besides a wonderful composition and design, we have also a wonderful expressive quality in the print itself, where here the printmaking, it's not really meant to be expressive. The design itself does everything, and the printing shouldn't really be noticed in the sense that you don't notice a imperfection or anything. What you do as a connoisseur is you carefully look at the printing, and here there's embossing throughout the kimono, and you can marvel at the precision, and that's how you sort of judge or enjoy these prints. Where here, the subject certainly is important, but the printing is equally important. And so I think, generally speaking, that's one of the most important differences between Shin Hanga and Sosaku Hanga. It is the role of the artist and how the artist is involved at every step of the process, and how the prints themselves and how they're produced, how the pigment lays on the surface of the paper, how the pigment has dispersed throughout the paper, all caused by certain printing techniques done in the moment of printing. All of that contributes to the end result. Where here, if you look at Goyos and you've had an opportunity to see more than one impression, you will see each impression is nearly perfect, and they all look the same. Whereas this design is known in so many different states. And I'll give you an example. I usually have books to show all of you, and in this case, I have a page out of the latest, let me move this, the latest Onchi catalog Raisonné. This book was produced for the 2016 exhibition in Tokyo and in Kansai. And here we have this design known in 3 states. All 3 prints are in the British Museum's collection, and you could see here is the closest version to the print that I have here, but it's still quite different. You'll notice this background here, there's this bokashi that ends with this whitish background. Here we have none of that, and we don't have the gray in the background. And this design, although it's quite nice and striking, and it's very different in its coloration. There's like purple here, and then a different blue. Here we have gray, and then gray here. And here we have some black. So the printing of this impression is quite different from even the closest example that's shown in the book. And that's very typical of Onchi's work, and this is why I love Onchi's work so much, because each impression takes on the quality of a monoprint. And you can say that about a lot of Sosaku Hanga artists working in the early period of the genre. It started in about 1904, and then it concluded with Onchi's death in 1955. So within that genre, you're going to find a lot of artists working in the same way, using the subjects that create as a means to convey emotional states that go beyond the topic they're or the subject they're even printing. And so it's fascinating to see that. Now, I want to point out, this is one of the main Goyo books here, and this is a different state. Goyo produced two versions of this design, one with a gold background and one with a silver one. And the gold background was achieved by printing a yellowish color to the background and then applying silver mica over it. And it takes on kind of a gold metallic quality to it. But it isn't actually gold. The mica in the background is still silver, but it's overprinted with a yellow. And you could see here, beyond the differences in the background color, the prints are identical. There's absolutely no difference in how they're printed. The colors are the same. Now, of course, there's issues with condition, and some of these colors could fade from one impression to another. But as they were originally, they all looked the same, which, you could say that there's a lot of credit goes to the printers to be able to produce a product with wonderful consistency, and that's great, absolutely. And Goyo's prints are certainly the most important, or among the most important, in Shin Hanga for their artistry, their carving, their printing, as well as the design, and they're just fantastic pieces. However, when we look at them in a greater context within this conversation, it's just one way of approaching printmaking, not necessarily the best way, but a very elegant way that certainly does all of the things it needed to do to achieve such a masterful impression. But there is a different way that is equally artistically interesting, that also captures the imagination of collectors around the world. So I've said a lot, and I just want to focus now on the print itself, and you could see how wonderfully printed both impressions are. One last thing I want to say, and I don't remember if I said it in this video. As I mentioned at the beginning, I had to redo this video a few times, and I spoke at length in the first version of this video. Unfortunately, I lost that video. But I wanted to say that this was done in 1930. This was done in 1920. These 10 years are huge, not just for printmaking, but also for the society itself in Japan. Women in the 1930s found themselves with a lot more freedom, at least in the late 20s and early 30s. The moga phenomena of young women who moved to big cities like Tokyo and were found new things to do. They were, in some ways, liberated from the old traditional ways of being, and they were able to, well, first of all, they cut their hair, they dressed in a more modern fashion, they'd go to cafes, they would go to nightclubs, enjoy martinis, and listen to jazz music. So they were able to experience a lifestyle that in many ways was unheard of to the women of the 1920s, early 20s. And so this print really speaks to the genteel time that Goyo was looking at, and he was also certainly looking back at Utamaro's time, and he, at this for Goyo at least, Utamaro was the epitome of the feminine style in printmaking, and so Goyo wanted to emulate that. For Onchi, he was less concerned with creating something that Goyo or Utamaro would have done, and he was more concerned with showing the dynamism of the period of time that this woman was in. Certainly, it was a time when women were doing so many new things, and this design is so active, with the figure moving towards the viewer. The design works in conjunction with the printing, which speaks to how active this work is. And so I think Onchi might be saying some things about that as well. And so I wanted to point that out. I pointed it out in another version of this video. I want to make sure that that was in this video. You know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I could put them side by side. So you could see they're very much of a different size, though this composition is done in a narrow format. This one is much more connected to the Edo period pillar style prints that Utamaro did certainly produce, as well as other Edo period print artists. And Onchi is echoing that shape, but I think primarily to focus more on the composition itself, and it's not as narrow as Goyo's. And so this is an atypical size for Utamaro, for Onchi, but it works for his composition. Well, I feel like I got something accomplished. This is my 4th attempt at this video. I think we're able to get it done, so I want to thank all of you for joining me, and I realized there was a couple of you that joined in the conversation over the course of 2 or 3 videos. Thanks for sticking around. Much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. And I want to welcome all of the YouTubers. I have a large following there on YouTube as well. And so all of my Woodblock Wednesday videos are uploaded after they're produced live onto YouTube. And you could have a look through over 100 different Woodblock Wednesdays that I've produced on a variety of topics. And today's conversation, Sosaku Hanga versus Shin Hanga, was discussed in another subject or another pair of prints, but it was a cityscape of Ginza, and so this is sort of a continuation of that conversation on a different subject. And I hope all of you enjoyed it. And as always, I just want to encourage all of you to visit my website, collectingjapaneseprints.com, where I offer an array of prints and paintings, as well as reference books in my bookstore. And beyond selling, I'm also very interested in buying. So if you happen to have Woodblock prints that you're interested in selling, feel free to reach out to me. My email is on my website. So I want to thank all of you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week on Woodblock Wednesday. Until then, bye-bye.